The greatest heroes and most evil villains of Marvel Comics were pitted against each other in secret wars. But as we move into our second chapter, shifting allegiances and new additions have turned the tide of the war.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to Carbon Scoring, the best place for comics history and action figures. We're continuing our deep dive into one of the most influential comics of all time, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. Plus, we're looking at all of the action figures based off of it.
This time looking at issues 4 through 6, a major turning point in the series. And of course, we're continuing our cover recreations, using modern Marvel Legends figures to capture the look and spirit of that incredible 80s art. In our first chapter, we talked about how Marvel Editor-in-Chief Jim Shooter was the only choice to write a company-wide crossover of all the biggest heroes and villains. But who had the skill to draw such an ambitious project, one that would require sometimes 30 unique characters in a single issue?
The answer was George Perez.
There was just one tiny problem. Perez was working for DC at the time. In fact, he was gearing up for his own epic event, Crisis on Infinite Earths.
But Marvel was very fortunate to have their own budding superstar ready and willing to take on the challenge, Mike Zeck.
Zeck got his start in the early 70s where many artists did, Charlton Comics.
Charlton was a notoriously cheap company. They got their start publishing song lyrics off a hand-me-down printing press originally used to print cereal boxes.
Because this ancient behemoth of a press was cheaper to keep running than to start and stop daily, they just started cranking out comics 24 hours a day. Romance, mystery, western, anything that could be done cheaply. Veteran artists like Steve Ditko loved it at Charlton because there was virtually zero editorial oversight.
And young writer-artists like John Byrne, Roger Stern, and Bob Layton earned their chops before moving on to larger projects at Marvel and DC.
For Zeck, his big break came penciling Master of Kung Fu with writer Doug Minch. Then in 1981, he became the regular artist on Captain America, teaming up with inker John Beatty on what would become a lengthy artistic partnership.
And partnership's a real thing. An inker can make or break a penciler, and Beatty and Zeck's styles merged perfectly. When Zeck was offered the job for Secret Wars, the first person he contacted was Beatty to make sure that he was on board. The two had loved their time together on Captain America, but this was an opportunity too big to pass up.
If you want to see just how incredible of an artist Mike Zeck is, particularly when paired with John Beatty, look no further than IDW's Artist Edition of Mike Zeck's classic Marvel stories. Now, you might recognize the cover image here, because obviously it's the cover to Secret Wars #1, but there's some interesting things. You can see, look, here's Mr. Fantastic, up here's Thor. We're going to get to that, but let's take a peek at some of this art. We're going to start kind of back here in the back with some of the earlier team-up work between Zeck and Beatty. And, this is from the early 80s, but you can already see just how great they do at drawing Captain America and putting it together. Beatty is really good at using this zipatone effect. You can see it here. It creates these amazing shadows, and he uses it pretty much throughout all of his work, and we saw a lot of that on his Secret Wars work too. But let's come back to a project that they did after Secret Wars, the Punisher miniseries. Again, look at that zipatone effect that Beatty is using in his inking, but also just the dynamic action that Zeck is able to put on the page. I mean, this here where Frank Castle is throwing a punch and just completely knocking the wind out of this guy. He's tossing these dudes. But then the covers, oh my gosh, this opening splash page, just beautiful. I think there's a cover probably coming up right here. Incredible work. I mean, this was a beautiful, beautiful work by the pair. But let's move forward a little bit, and we'll take a peek at some of the original art for Secret Wars. Here are some pages from the very first issue. In fact, look at this. Here, this is so much on the inker to get this action in, but it has to be grounded in spectacular drawing by the artist. I mean, just beautiful action. Look at that Zipatone effect on Iron Man to really bring his armor out. Oh my gosh. I also think it's pretty funny. This is the original page work. See, it's just reprinted and you can see the Secret Wars. Shh, it's a secret on here. But let's look. There's a giant gatefold in here of the cover to the first issue. So let's try to, before we do, look at that splash page. Just look at everything happening here. That first issue, I know they took a little bit of extra time on it. They probably got started on it earlier, and so they were able to crush the detail of this. I mean, to see what the original art looked like is just absolutely amazing. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the original art for the cover. And here it is. I'm going to leave it long ways on the screen. I know that's a little bit awkward, but there's some things that you can see that are different from this to the published page. First off, here's Kitty Pryde. She did not appear in the comic at all. That was probably a running change to the story. Up at the top, there is Thor, and here's Mr. Fantastic. They were not on that original cover. And I really kind of wondered why. Like, this is clearly how it was originally drawn. And, I kind of wanted to know what the deal was.
I figured the best person to ask was Mike Zeck himself, so I shot him an email.
And he answered me that same day. Turns out, the cover art was produced well in advance of the first issue and had a dual purpose. It was also going to serve as an in-store promotional poster to be given to comic shops. He said that he created the art with the poster in mind, knowing that Mr. Fantastic and Thor could be deleted to create space for the logo elements of the final cover. And, as expected, the story evolved, and Kitty Pryde was cut after the drawing was complete. But all of this hard work took its toll, and Zeck and Beatty were struggling with Shooter's hard and fast monthly deadlines. So they called their friend and fellow Charlton alum, Bob Layton, to help fill in on issues 4 and 5. Issue 4 starts with a bang, literally, as the villains destroy the hero's base. While they rummage through the wreckage searching for survivors, Dr. Octopus spots them gathering 5 miles away. They prepare to attack again. But a newly confident Molecule Man assures them that won't be necessary, as he simply picks up an entire mountain range and proceeds to drop it on our unsuspecting heroes. Molecule Man has one of the most complex character arcs in the entire book. First appearing all the way back in Fantastic Four issue 20, he was often treated as a joke of a villain, despite his ability to control all molecules. When we first see him in issue 1, he's a sniveling weakling, afraid to use his powers. Doom recognizes the virtually limitless abilities he possesses, and uses a very different tact with him, showing him the respect that he has never before received. But it's the affection of Volcana that truly turns mild-mannered Owen Reese into the Molecule Man. This was one of the biggest holes in my Secret Wars Modern collection, one of the final 2 figures we needed to complete the characters who were on those 2 transports. I feel like the costume is pretty accurate to the 80s era, with those 80s electric shoulder pads tapering down to the waist, where his top extends below his lightning bolt belt. I like the baggy pants. It works for a character who's not known for muscle. But you have to get the head sculpt right. And this one is spot on, from the slick back hair to those distinctive Jack Kirby designed scars. Perhaps we could have been on a scrawnier frame, but this is the last Molecule Man I'll ever need. Meanwhile, with our heroes presumed dead, Magneto's ongoing seduction of the Wasp is interrupted by the arrival of the X-Men. Magneto lays out his plan, an aggressive one, designed to slaughter his enemies and use the Beyonders' powers to create an Earth where mutants and men could live in peace. This was quite enough for the Wasp, who shrinks down, zips through the X-Men, and takes off in a commandeered ship. Just as Magneto was to strike her down for such mockery, Xavier stops him, recalling his own weakness in mind-wiping Spidey, calling himself no better than Hitler in that moment, an illusion that brings pause to Holocaust survivor Magneto. Dr. Doom is doing a little housekeeping of his own. In response to Kang's betrayal in the first issue, Doom has his pet Ultron disintegrate Kang, to the horror of his fellow villains. Kang always seemed like a really bad fit for this story. As a virtually immortal Time Lord, he would have had very little use for Beyonder's game. Writer Jim Shooter must have felt the same, as he dispatched him at first chance. I wonder if his inclusion was a Mattel decision. If so, that was one of the most epic fails in marketing, as Kang's Secret Wars figure became the greatest peg warmer in the history of toys. Yes, maybe the most overlooked figure of the 1980s, which I think was due more to the obscurity of the character than the merits of the figure. I mean, that's a pretty spot-on Kang head sculpt, and in a line known for cutting every corner possible, Kang got an additional plastic armor piece to provide a distinctive look. Mattel showed no disrespect to Kang, no. That would be Hasbro for putting out this version in the earliest days of the line. They fully made up for it, though, with this 2020 updated figure. A perfect head sculpt with subtle paint apps leads to a tapered blouse, I guess? Look, we all know Kang's a time traveler, but I'm glad I don't live in whatever era he found thigh-high boots on men to be cool. Fashion choices aside, this is exactly what a comic Kang should be. But what of our heroes? Crushed under an entire mountain range. I thought this was a 12-issue series, not a 4... Oh, wait. There they are. Trapped beneath 2 miles of solid rock. The only thing standing between them and certain death is the strength of Hulk's back. But time and air are running out, so they wake the only man that can help them get out of this. Reed Richards. It only takes him a few seconds to assess the situation. Then, using his brilliant intellect, he MacGyvers the crap out of things, taking electronics from Hawkeye's arrows, combined with Spidey's web shooters, and routes the whole thing through Iron Man's armor. Captain America asks if he can help. Reed simply says no. Only brains can save them now. But in an uncharacteristic move, Reed taunts fellow genius Bruce Banner, calling him a simple brute, angering the Hulk all the more. With his makeshift device ready, Reed has Johnny and Captain Marvel channel all their energies into Iron Man's armor, overloading it until finally... These are arguably my 2 favorite pages of the entire series. While the Hulk's might gave them a chance, it was only the ingenuity and intellect of Reed Richards that saved the day. As a budding nerdling, my heart swelled with pride. Once clear, Richards immediately apologized to Hulk, respectfully addressing him as Dr. Banner. But there was no need. He had realized that Reed's insults were specifically designed to enrage the Hulk, increasing his strength so that he could hold on for those final few seconds. The Hulk was in a transition stage at this point. Yes, he has the intellect of Banner, but he realizes he is quickly losing it. His struggle causing him to miss the alarms in the previous issue, which allowed the villain's surprise attack to succeed. Once the Secret Wars were complete, he would soon lose all control again, becoming a mindless rage monster.
At the time of Secret Wars' release in 1984, the Hulk was probably the second most well-known Marvel character behind only Spider-Man, and that's due to his appearance on his hit TV show in the late 70s and early 80s. And there was no way that Mattel was going to create a brand new form factor and give us a Hulk figure in the line. I mean, this line is notorious for its cost cutting, so the likelihood of actually getting a Hulk is virtually zero. So I really like this 2006 Toy Biz Face-Off series Hulk. I think it's one of the best ones that we've ever gotten. There's just something so just raging about that head sculpt. It's just really, really good. You know, some of the articulation is a little bit dated, as we might see, but this is still a good Hulk figure and one that's been on display in my Avengers lineup for a long time. Of the newer Hulks, probably the Marvel Legends 20th Anniversary Hulk is my favorite. Huge body, great frame, much better modern articulation. But this head sculpt, even though I really love it, with the hair kind of coming down over his ears and this face, it's more of a 70s Hulk more so than the 80s Hulk. So I think for Secret Wars, we got to go with the Hulk that came in the 80th anniversary 2-pack with the Origin Wolverine. This is really a much more 80s Hulk. You can see he's a brighter green. His hair is a little bit different. It's more kind of that era that Mike Zeck was drawing. So I think this is really the most representative Hulk from Secret Wars.
Battered and broken, our heroes shelter in a nearby village, within eyesight of Galactus. A local healer treats their wounds, with some unbeknownst side effects. The mighty Thor has rejoined them. He had freed, then sought counsel with his fellow Asgardian, the Enchantress, looking to form a coalition between the two gods. It was not to be. Back in the village, Reed stares up at the mighty Galactus, when things suddenly go from bad to worse.
When it comes to Marvel Legends Thor figures, this is pretty easy. The 80th anniversary Thor takes the cake. It just is such a classic representation of the Thunder God. The suit is correct. We've got the big silver, circles here. He's got the boots with the paint app so you can see, kind of the black in between, these swashes of cloth. Hammer with the inscription on it. Great head sculpt. It's not really specific to any one artist, but it just is a good general representation of Thor. Just everything that you could really want in a Marvel Legends Thor figure. It's the right size. He's bigger than most everybody else. The only thing that would really make this figure better, taking the sticky gum off of it, would be a cloth cape. If he came with a cloth cape with underwire, that would absolutely crush it. Now, Mafex gave us a Thor here this past year that did have the cloth cape, but he's just so small. He doesn't scale with Marvel Legends the way that this guy does. So we got to stick with this particular Norse god for Secret Wars.
This is pretty cool stuff, huh? If you love these deep dives into comics history and action figures, give this video a like and subscribe to Carbon Scoring, because this is what we are all about. As this series has progressed, the differing factions had split into 4 separate camps. The villains, led by Dr. Doom. Captain America's beleaguered side. The combined mutant forces of Magneto and the X-Men, while Galactus stood alone. But as the 5th issue opens, Galactus's plans become more clear. In the ultimate boss move, the Devourer of Worlds has summoned his home ship. Richards recognizes the significance and attempts to contact him, but is quickly rebuffed. Now alerted of the hero's presence, Galactus sends his watchdog down to dispatch them. But through Cap's experienced leadership and Torch's Nova Flame, the menace is defeated.
The Human Torch is another figure that I think really could have pretty easily been done by Mattel. He certainly would have fit on their standard body frame, and you could have made him just basically that red-orange with the little black lines as he was drawn at the time. You didn't even have to really add a whole lot of extra plastic for fire effects. He would have worked really well. He would have looked totally stupid carrying one of the lenticular shields, but that certainly didn't stop them from doing that for Spider-Man. Thankfully, we got kind of the perfect 80s Torch in the Fantastic Four retro card line. This one is just great. I mean, it certainly carries everything that you want the Torch to have. It's got the translucent plastic, so when you get it in certain light, you can see it shine through. He does have those 80s black lines drawn on him from the head all the way down, so it really does make it look like exactly how he was drawn during that era, during that John Byrne, Mike Zeck era. But Torch had kind of a fairly lengthy storyline throughout Secret Wars. He had his affair with the alien villager Zaja, who was the healer. And because of that, we saw Torch outside of his powered up version quite a bit. So, lucky for us, that version also appeared in the retro card back line. And there's a pretty strong Johnny in the correct suit. He's in the negative zone suit where the colors are white and blue and works really well. Just a little bit of flame on his hands, but gives us kind of a powered down, flame off Johnny Storm to add to our collections.
Galactus's distraction allows Doom's troops to attack again. The heroes are on the cusp of ultimate defeat when the X-Men arrive to lend a hand. Losses are heavy on both sides, and each makes a hasty retreat. The X-Men, particularly Wolverine, were enraged to leave Colossus behind, but Professor X stands his ground.
All right, not only am I going no wheelchair here for Professor X to give respect to the fact that he could actually walk during Secret Wars, but I'm taking it way back old school with the Toy Biz Professor X. Yes, I know the hover chair one that came with kind of the 90s Jim Lee look is, arguably a better figure. But just look at how great this Toy Biz figure is. I mean, he's got great sculpting. His hands kind of have that crazy flappy hand, but it does let you kind of bring it up, so that he can do like his telekinesis kind of look. He can put his head down, put his hands right up to his temple, be thinking about that, be thinking about mind wiping Spidey or talking back to Magneto. Great suit, he's like got the vest, and the jacket has a little bit of play to it so that you can move it around. Just a really good Professor X figure from early in the Toy Biz line.
While these battles were going on, the Enchantress made her play, appealing to Doom's vanity, offering to heal his scarred face. While tempted, Doom declines, and with that, the Enchantress is gone. Enchantress was part of the 2016 San Diego Comic-Con Raft box set, and as would be expected of a new figure in a convention-exclusive pack, she was pretty hot on the aftermarket. But later that same year, this version was released in the Dormammu Build-A-Figure wave. While the exclusive had a shinier paint on the green of her costume, this figure had far superior paint apps on the face. Both had those great Kirby-styled stockings, truly the highlight of an otherwise uninspired design. Enchantress is, however, a necessary part of our Secret Wars collection. After a 2-issue break to catch back up on deadlines, the art team of Mike Zeck and John Beatty returned for issue 6. However, it was still Bob Layton on the cover, essentially a villain's version of that monumental cover to issue 1. Unfortunately, on my reproduction, I did have to make one switch, replacing Titania, who's still missing from our collections, with Molecule Man. The issue starts as we check back in with the Wasp, frantically fleeing Magneto's fortress. She crashes her vehicle, certainly not because she's a female driver, although she does complain about breaking a nail in the crash. Lost in an otherworldly swamp, she comes across another castaway, the Lizard. Noticing he was injured, she dresses his wounds, thus forming a connection, despite telling him she would turn him into a purse if he misbehaves. It's a nice moment. So of course she is murdered in the very next panel. An enraged Lizard attacks those responsible, the Wrecking Crew, before being frozen in a status beam.
And here we have the lovely Janet Van Dyne, the wondrous Wasp, and all the different Wasp figures that I have. She was someone who changed her costume constantly, so it doesn't really bother me that we don't have a true Secret Wars costume for her. But let's take a look at the ones that we do have and see which one we think fits the best. So right off the bat, we have 2 Toy Biz figures on the left, 2 Hasbro figures on the right. And as you can see, the ones on either end are actually the same costume. And it's pretty clear, even though all 4 of these have different haircuts, this is certainly the weakest of the figures. Just terrible old Toy Biz body, not going to work, and we can't have 2 of the same one. So we'll go ahead and move her out. And while we're at it, even though this is such a good figure, it really represents more of the George Perez kind of early 2000s versions of the Avengers, so it's a little bit too modern for what we're going for. So we're left with 1 Toy Biz and 1 Hasbro figure. And honestly, I think I could see both of them in Secret Wars. They're both very good. I've actually used both of them in my action figure photography. The one on the left was on the cover of the first issue, and the one on the right has been on the covers of other issues. The one on the left, the red suit, is probably closer to the Secret Wars outfit, but truthfully, that's the best Wasp figure that we've gotten so far. So this is the one that we're going to stick with for our display. Another figure where I'm going to make kind of an unconventional choice is with the Lizard. So I have the Walmart exclusive Lizard from just not too long ago in Marvel Legends, and it's terrific. It definitely, is a comic-y look. It's maybe a little closer to the cartoon, but it's a great Lizard, but it just doesn't have kind of the grime and the lizardiness that this old school Toy Biz figure had. Toy Biz was not afraid to go heavy on the paint wash, and you can see that here on these pants where it really gives him a lived in, kind of worn in look. His ripped shirt is sculpted well, and the flare of his coat with even some like scuffing of his lab coat just looks really natural. There is a bendy wire in this tail, which is sweet, but I love that head sculpt, that kind of mix of dinosaur lizard head sculpt with an articulated jaw. So you can have him down or you can have him kind of full on attack mode, and his giant claws really will work well for that. So this is one that, yes, we have gotten newer figures, and in many ways it's a better figure, but there's just something so charming and grimy and grungy about this Lizard that this is the one that I want representing my Secret Wars version.
Back at Magneto's base, Professor X reaches out to read the minds of the villains in an attempt to determine their next move. Then he telepathically orders the X-Men to protect an active volcano, a mission to be led by Cyclops. And with that, Storm had had enough. While Cyclops had been the X-Men's field leader for many years, this was now Storm's team, and she confronted Xavier over his assertion of control. The professor demanded allegiance, threatening that if it was not offered, it would be taken. Storm leaves as the rift between Professor X and his X-Men widens. So much of our nostalgic draw to these characters is related to how we were first introduced to them. If you were a 70s comic reader, then Dave Cockrum's Goddess Storm will always be your choice. If the X-Men cartoon was your entry point, then a white-suited, dual-caped Storm will be the one for you. But for me, a kid of the 1980s, my Storm is a leather jacket wearing, mohawk flowing, punk rock leader of the X-Men. This 2017 figure oozes that defiant energy, best defined by the subtle smirk on her face. As I've said, Secret Wars defined my love for these characters, so that makes this my definitive Storm. In the hero's village, Colossus continues to heal with the help of the alien Zaja, unaware that her healing powers also cause the patient to fall in love with her, something the Human Torch has been fully infected with. The remainder of the heroes grow restless, hungry for action, but Captain America continues to preach patience. Others continue to prepare for the battles to come, such as Hawkeye, who is whittling new arrows, his previous ones used up in the escape from under the mountain. Iron Man makes a pass at Captain Marvel, who is still fairly new to the superhero game, but she's in no mood for what she calls singles bar chit-chat, and flies off.
Once again, your mileage may vary, but I love this Monica Rambeau Captain Marvel figure. Again, it goes back to nostalgia. It goes back to what was your experience when you first came across these characters. And when I was originally reading the Avengers, this was Captain Marvel. I didn't know anything about Carol Danvers. I didn't know anything about Marvel. All I knew was this woman was named Captain Marvel. And it's equally important because she was the last hero that I needed in order to complete the cover recreation for the first issue of Secret Wars. So just a crucial piece to my collection, and one that I feel like is done really, really well. You know, she's got great proportions. Her suit is just so clean. Just black and white is hard to go wrong with. And I really like how they managed to capture the wings, kind of the sort of semi-cape underneath here. I think it flows really well, and it works in every position with her arm straight or her arm bent. Now, we've seen a lot of valid attempts, but total fails at getting Spidey's wings right. This is one where it just truly does work. But the head, with that great expression, that face print, and that gorgeous hair, just crushing that style, it just makes this an absolute beast of a figure. So she's gotten a little bit of flack from, you know, other YouTubers and other people, but not from me, baby. This is my Captain Marvel, and I absolutely love her.
Professor Xavier's telepathic information was correct. The forces of evil had been dispatched to an active volcano, where they were met by the X-Men. As usual, the two sides sit down and calmly discuss their differences, listening intently to the needs of the other. Nah, I'm just kidding. They get into a huge fight. Recognizing his power, Wolverine targets Molecule Man, and just as he is about to administer the killing blow, Cyclops deflects his strike. Less decisive is Rogue, the newest member of the X-Men. She had recently turned from villain to hero, and as she ponders which side she truly belongs on, she gets clocked by Titania.
I'll admit, Rogue's a tough one because we really haven't gotten the right costume for her. We haven't seen her with the super short hair that she had, but this is the closest thing with the ponytail, so you can kind of hide it back there. The white streak on this is way bigger than it needs to be, but this figure did come with kind of the little skirt, which I think is best represents what we've seen. Plus, that costume does kind of have some lines on it, and while this is obviously way more with the X symbols and more lines, it's the closest one that I think that we've gotten. You know, the Outback Rogue is probably my favorite one so far. I like it better than kind of all of the Jim Lee versions that we've had. And we truly haven't had an 80s version of Rogue. And I don't know that we ever really need one. It's probably her least interesting look, and it would only be for just psycho completionists like me that would want it just to complete our Secret Wars display. But in the meantime, this is as close as we're going to get, so this is what I'm sticking with.
As the issue ends, Galactus is nearing completion on the mechanism he's been working on, while Doom continues his own independent plans for victory. And a new variable, perhaps friend, perhaps foe, lurks in the shadows. Holy cow, man, we are only halfway through this story. Remember, if you like these comic cover recreations, you can buy high-quality digital versions at my Etsy store for only $2. Link in the description. And if you haven't seen part 1, check it out here. And get prepared for parts 3 and 4. And as always, for the best in comics history and action figures, subscribe to Carbon Scoring.